Snow began falling before dusk, slow and deliberate, as if the town itself was pausing to remember something it had almost forgotten. Evergreen Street glowed softly under strings of uneven lights. Wreaths hung on doors that rarely opened anymore, and plastic decorations stood frozen in cheerful poses. Inside the small community hall, Christmas music played just a little too loudly, echoing off old wooden walls filled with laughter, chatter, and the clatter of folding chairs. Miriam Cole stood near the refreshment table, holding a paper cup of cider she hadn't tasted. She hadn't planned on coming. For nearly 10 years, Christmas Eve had been quiet for her books, candles, and memories she didn't invite but couldn't turn away. Yet the flyer had been slipped under her door anyway. Everyone welcome. The word had lingered in her mind longer than she expected. And now, here she was, surrounded by neighbors who felt both familiar and distant. She felt invisible, and oddly comforted by that. Children ran between tables, their laughter sharp and careless. Couples leaned close, sharing private warmth. The heater rattled loudly, struggling against the cold outside. Miriam watched the door more than once, already planning a quiet exit. But before she could move, a sharp screech from the microphone cut through the noise. "All right, everyone, just a moment," a man's voice called out. Miriam stiffened when she recognized it. Jonah Reed stood near the small stage, one hand gripping the microphone, the other shoved into his coat pocket. She hadn't seen him properly in years. He looked older now, his hair threaded with gray, his confidence softened by something quieter beneath the surface. "Thanks for coming out tonight," Jonah said. "I know it's cold, and I know some of us had to argue with ourselves to get out the door." Laughter rippled through the room. "This street has changed," he continued, "but tonight is about reminding ourselves that we're still here, together." Miriam felt something tighten in her chest. She remembered Jonah from years ago, the man who organized block parties, grilled food with music blasting, always surrounded by noise and life. She also remembered the silence that followed after the accident that took his wife. The microphone squealed again, and Jonah winced. "There's food, music, and later, we'll light a candle outside for those who couldn't be here tonight." His eyes scanned the room, passing over faces until they stopped briefly on Miriam, just for a second, but it was enough. He saw her, not as background, not as someone waiting to leave, but as someone standing there trying not to disappear. Jonah smiled gently, handed the mic away, and the music resumed. Miriam looked down at her hands, surprised to find them trembling. Later, Miriam stepped outside for air. The cold hit her immediately, sharp and clean, clearing her head. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she walked toward the far end of the building, where a crooked string of lights hung above an old wooden bench. She sat down and exhaled slowly. This, she told herself, was why she came, to feel something, even if it was brief. "You, okay?" a voice asked. She looked up to see Jonah standing a few feet away, holding 2 cups of cider. "I thought you might have escaped," he said gently. "You always used to." Miriam blinked. "I didn't know anyone noticed." Jonah smiled faintly. "You were quiet, not invisible, just quiet." He handed her a warm cup. Their fingers brushed, brief but grounding. "Yours inside was cold," he added. They stood side by side, watching snow gather along the railing. "I wasn't sure you'd come tonight," Jonah admitted. "I wasn't sure either," Miriam replied. The silence between them wasn't awkward, just careful. "I'm glad you did," he said. "Why?" she asked softly. Jonah hesitated. "Because some people stop coming altogether, and when someone doesn't, it feels like a gift." The words settled between them. Gift. Miriam stared at the snow. "I almost stopped coming to things like this," she admitted. "It's tiring, pretending you belong to the noise when you mostly live in the quiet." Jonah nodded. "The quiet gets louder." "Yes," she said, "it does." They talked longer than either expected. About books Miriam loved and Jonah hadn't read, about music that still lived in memory. Jonah confessed he hadn't decorated his house this year. Miriam admitted she'd nearly taken her tree down for good. When people began gathering outside with candles, Jonah gestured gently. "Come on." They stood shoulder to shoulder as flames flickered in the cold air. Names were spoken aloud, some familiar, some not. Loss lingered, heavy but shared. When the last candle was lit, Jonah turned to her. "Would you like to walk a bit?" She nodded. They walked slowly down Evergreen Street, lights glowing softly around them. Snow softened every sound. At Miriam's door, they stopped. Neither rushed. "I'm not looking for anything complicated," Jonah said carefully. "I just didn't want tonight to pass without saying I'm glad you're still here." Miriam felt warmth spread through her chest. I'm glad you are too, she said. They didn't promise anything. But as Jonah walked away, Miriam realized the quiet inside her house felt different, less empty. Outside, the last light on Evergreen Street glowed steadily through the snow. The days after Christmas felt strangely lighter. Miriam found herself humming while washing dishes, lingering over morning coffee, opening curtains she usually left closed. She told herself it was just the season, just a passing mood. But when Jonah knocked on her door 2 days later, holding a small box of pastries from the corner bakery, her heart fluttered in a way she hadn't felt in years. I hope this isn't strange, he said. I had extras. Nothing strange about kindness, she replied, stepping aside. They sat at the kitchen table, sunlight cutting through the cold air. Conversation came easily now, unforced. He told her about learning to cook after his daughters moved away. She told him about retiring and wondering who she was without shelves of books and whispered routines. They began meeting like that, casually, gently. Walks through the neighborhood, coffee that stretched into hours, no expectations. No labels, but change rarely stays quiet. A neighbor's glance lingered too long, a smile faded too quickly. One afternoon, Miriam overheard a whispered comment at the grocery store. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. That night, she told Jonah. People are noticing, she said. They always do, he replied softly. The question is whether we let them decide what this means. Miriam struggled with the answer. She wasn't afraid of judgment as much as she was afraid of disappointment, of believing again, and losing it. The tension came to a head at the New Year's gathering on Evergreen Street. Music played, fireworks popped in the distance, and laughter filled the cold night. Miriam stood beside Jonah, aware of eyes on them. Someone asked, half joking, "So when did this happen?" The question landed harder than intended. Jonah looked at Miriam, waiting. She realized then that the fear wasn't about him. It was about herself, about stepping into light after so many years in shadow. Miriam took a breath. It happened when we remembered we're still here, she said calmly. The conversation moved on. Jonah squeezed her hand once, grateful but not possessive. Later that night, standing beneath fireworks reflected in snow, Jonah spoke quietly. I don't need certainty, he said. I just need honesty. Miriam looked at him, truly looked, and felt something steady inside her. Then let's be honest, she replied, about where we are, even if we don't know where it leads. Jonah smiled, not triumphant, but relieved. Winter deepened, and Evergreen Street grew quieter again. Decorations came down, lights disappeared one by one, yet something remained. Miriam and Jonah didn't rush into anything grand. No declarations, no promises spoken too loudly. What they built lived in the ordinary. Shared meals, comfortable silence, the freedom to be seen without performance. One evening, Jonah stood in Miriam's living room, looking at the faint outline where her Christmas tree had stood. You kept it longer this year, he said. I wanted to, she replied. For the first time, it felt like it belonged. The real test came unexpectedly. Jonah's daughter visited from out of town, hesitant but curious. The conversation was awkward, careful, but honest. Miriam didn't try to impress. Jonah didn't defend. They simply existed as they were. Later that night, Jonah admitted he'd been afraid. Of what? Miriam asked. That this would cost you peace, he said. She smiled softly. It gave it back to me. On the last snowy night of winter, they walked Evergreen Street again. The same bench, the same crooked light. Jonah stopped. I don't know what next year looks like, he said. Miriam took his hand. Neither do I, but I know how this feels. They stood quietly, snow falling around them, no fireworks, no music, just presence, and it was enough. As Miriam returned home that night, she noticed the quiet again, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt open, like space waiting to be filled, not feared. Outside, Evergreen Street rested under fresh snow, and inside her chest, something warm stayed lit long after the last light went out.